It was said later that the chandeliers that night burned brighter than usual, though none could swear whether it was wax or gossip feeding the flames. Beneath them, the great ballroom of Ashcombe House breathed silk, perfume, and expectation, a living creature fed by glances and judgments. Lady Eliza Harrington entered quietly, as women without armor must, her gloved hands folded, her chin lifted not in pride but survival. Tonight, London intended to decide who she was allowed to be. She felt the verdict already forming behind painted smiles and fluttering fans of bone and lace nearby around her now. She wore a gown of pale blue, chosen for modesty rather than notice, yet it betrayed her all the same, clinging where nerves tightened, whispering vulnerability to those trained to detect it. Eliza knew the language of rooms. She had learned it young, after her father's death left their name respectable but thin. Tonight, she had come resolved to be pleasant, forgettable, safe. Safety, however, was a luxury denied to women whose futures depended upon favor, and favor thrived on risk. She smiled anyway, because refusal was noticed more than compliance ever would be. That lesson endured within her still. He stood apart, the Duke of Ravensmere, as unmoving as the portraits of his ancestors lining the walls. Society had sculpted him into legend early, the reserved duke, the silent benefactor, the man whose approval arrived rarely and departed never. His dark coat fit him like restraint itself. When he looked, it was with precision, not hunger, and many mistook that discipline for absence of feeling. Eliza did not. She had seen the flicker once, long ago, and it had unsettled her more than any declaration might. Tonight, however, he offered nothing, not a glance, not a warning, not courtesy. The rival was everything the Duke was not. Smiling, golden, careless with attention. Lord Percival Hawthorne leaned toward Eliza, his voice pitched just low enough to imply intimacy, his laughter bright as spilled wine. He knew he was watched. Men like him thrived on reflection. His interest was obvious, theatrical, safe in its shallowness. Eliza responded with practiced warmth, because courtesy was her shield. She did not flirt to entice, but to endure, to remind the room she was chosen by someone, even if that someone did not matter. The cost of survival was misunderstanding, and she paid it nightly. Whispers bloomed quickly. A lifted brow, a fan paused, a sentence broke apart midair. Eliza felt them before she heard them, the way one senses rain before it falls. She knew the story forming, the desperate daughter, courting spectacle, the imprudent girl, inviting consequence. No mention would be made of how few doors stood open to her. Lord Percival enjoyed the attention, his smile sharpening as rumor warmed. Across the room, the Duke watched, and in his stillness something tightened. Those who noticed mistook it for disdain. Eliza, trapped in borrowed laughter, mistook it for indifference. Both were wrong tonight. It was the Duke who moved first, though no one could later say when the decision had been made. He set aside his glass, the crystal chiming softly, and that small sound carried further than any announcement. Eliza did not see him approach. She was listening too carefully to Lord Percival's flattering emptiness. When she sensed the shift, it was as one senses a door closing. The Duke stopped beside her, close enough that his presence altered the air. He did not look at her. He looked at his rival. In that glance lay warning, possession, and something more dangerous. Conversation thinned. Lord Percival laughed once, too loudly, and excused himself, sensing when admiration curdled into threat. Eliza remained, suddenly alone with the Duke, the space between them charged by everything unsaid. He offered his arm with formal precision, an invitation that was not a request. Custom demanded compliance. Instinct urged retreat. She accepted, because refusal would ignite what she could not yet afford. As they moved through the crowd, whispers bent toward them, reshaping themselves. Shame warmed her skin, followed closely by anger. The Duke's grip was light, controlled, but it anchored her more firmly than any promise had. They stopped near the edge of the room, where a curtained alcove offered the illusion of privacy. Music swelled elsewhere, a waltz that celebrated unity while they stood divided. Eliza waited for rebuke, dismissal, instruction. Instead, the Duke spoke her name, softly, precisely, as if testing its weight. That alone unsettled her. No one spoke her name as if it mattered. His eyes remained forward, his voice low. "You are playing a dangerous game," he said. The words were restrained, yet beneath them stirred heat. Eliza answered without turning. "I am merely surviving," she replied. Silence followed, dense as velvet. The Duke inhaled slowly, as if gathering himself against something larger than etiquette. "Survival," he murmured, "is not the same as surrender." At that, she looked at him, truly looked, and found his composure fractured. It was there, the flicker she remembered, sharpened by jealousy and fear. For an instant, the world narrowed to that admission. She felt foolish, seen. The music swelled again, pressing time forward. He straightened, reclaiming distance. "You will forgive me," he said formally, "for interrupting." He released her arm. The loss of contact startled her more than his presence had. Something irrevocable had shifted tonight. Eliza stood alone once more, the ballroom resuming its breath around her. Laughter returned, conversations stitched themselves whole, yet she felt altered, as if a door had opened and refused to close. Across the room, the Duke did not look back. He moved away, his shoulders squared, carrying restraint like a wound. Only then did she understand. His silence had never been absence. It had been vigilance. And somewhere, between survival and surrender, she sensed the truth. She had chosen the wrong protection. As the music swelled, his words echoed unspoken, promising a reckoning yet to come, and she trembled. Morning arrived with the cruelty of clarity. What the chandeliers had blurred, daylight sharpened, and by breakfast the ballroom had been translated into rumor. Eliza Harrington learned this not from newspapers, but from omission. Invitations failed to arrive. A cousin's note turned strangely brief. At the modistes, conversation paused when she entered, then resumed with forced brightness that excluded her entirely. Society had decided that her laughter beside Lord Percival was not courtesy but calculation, not survival but ambition. It was remarkable how swiftly a woman could be rewritten once men supplied the ink. She adjusted herself accordingly, walking with measured grace through streets that felt newly narrow. Each glance weighed her, each silence accused. Eliza told herself she had endured worse, that dignity was a muscle strengthened by use. Yet the Duke's words lingered like a bruise beneath silk. Survival is not surrender. She did not know whether to resent him for saying it, or herself for believing it might be true. Either way, his absence now pressed more heavily than his presence had. He did not call. He did not write. Silence, once mistaken for indifference, returned sharpened by memory. Lord Percival, by contrast, became impossible to avoid. He appeared at the opera, in parks, at dinners she had not known she would attend until her name was announced. His attentions grew bolder, more public, his compliments edged with ownership. He spoke of her as if she were already decided, a victory unfolding at leisure. Eliza smiled when required and demurred when permitted, acutely aware that refusal without alternative invited ridicule. Each encounter fed the story forming around her, and she sensed that Lord Percival enjoyed the momentum too much to arrest it. He was a man accustomed to applause, and scandal was merely another stage. The first token arrived without explanation. A book, delivered by a gloved hand, its binding modest but immaculate. Inside, a single pressed violet rested between pages, unaccompanied by name or message. Eliza recognized the volume at once. It was one she had once admired aloud, long ago, when she believed admiration harmless. Her fingers trembled as she closed it. No one else could have remembered. The gift unsettled her more than diamonds might have, for it suggested attention without claim, care without witness. She placed it carefully aside, unsure whether to hide it or hold it close. More followed. An introduction arranged just in time to spare her from social embarrassment. A carriage delayed so she might avoid walking alone beneath staring eyes. Small mercies, invisibly executed, always arriving when she most needed relief. Each carried the same signature absence, a kindness that refused recognition. Eliza began to understand the Duke's language at last. He spoke through acts, not words, and his restraint was deliberate. Gratitude warred with confusion. Protection without acknowledgement felt like possession denied its own name. It saved her, yet kept her suspended, unable to move forward or retreat. The scandal, when it came, wore civility like a mask. A remark overheard at tea, repeated with delicate concern. A question framed as sympathy. Was it wise, people wondered, to encourage such rivalry? Had Eliza forgotten her place? The implication spread that she courted two men to secure one. It was a convenient narrative, flattering to male vanity and punishing to female agency. Eliza felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. Every anonymous kindness now threatened to be recast as evidence of manipulation. She could neither claim the Duke's protection nor deny it. Silence became accusation again. She encountered him unexpectedly one afternoon in the conservatory of a mutual acquaintance. Sunlight filtered through glass, breaking into fragments across leaves and marble. For a moment, neither spoke. The Duke inclined his head, formal as ever, his expression composed to the point of severity. Eliza curtsied, her pulse loud in her ears. Words crowded her throat, gratitude and reproach indistinguishable. He did not mention the gifts. He did not mention Lord Percival. Instead, he asked if she was well. The question was absurdly gentle. She answered truthfully enough to be dangerous. "I am surviving," she said. Something flickered again, quickly extinguished. That evening, the rumor sharpened into threat. Lord Percival announced his intention to escort her publicly to the next assembly, framing it as an honor she would be foolish to refuse. Declining would humiliate him. Accepting would confirm the worst assumptions. Eliza sat alone, the anonymous book open before her, violet pressed flat by time. She understood now that restraint was no shield. The Duke's silence, however protective, could not counter a lie spoken loudly enough. She folded the invitation, hands steady despite the tremor beneath. Somewhere, a choice was being made for her. As dusk gathered, another message arrived, sealed in dark wax, bearing no crest. Inside, a single line, unmistakably his: "Do not go where you are displayed. Wait." The command unsettled her more than any plea might have. It offered no explanation, only trust. Eliza stood at the window, the city breathing below, scandal rising like fog. To wait was to risk everything. To refuse was to surrender herself to the story already written. She closed her eyes, clutching the note, and wondered whether survival, at last, required defiance. The room had been prepared with deliberate discretion, as if secrecy itself were an invited guest. The Duke's library lay deep within Ravensmere House, far from windows that invited witness, its tall shelves shadowed and solemn, its lamps turned low. Rain traced thin lines down the glass panes, a patient tapping that measured time more cruelly than any clock. Eliza was shown in by a servant who vanished without comment, leaving her alone with the quiet and the fire and the man who stood with his back to her, hands braced against the mantel as though holding himself in place. She did not speak at once. Silence, she had learned, was often a provocation. The Duke turned slowly, his expression composed but taut, as if every muscle were enlisted in restraint. He inclined his head, neither warm nor distant, merely precise. "You received my note," he said. It was not a question. Eliza answered with equal care. "I did." The words sounded small in the vastness of the room. She removed her gloves, a gesture she did not entirely understand, and laid them beside her, signaling a vulnerability she had not intended to offer. "You are aware," he continued, "that your name is being spoken." Eliza met his gaze fully now. "My name has always been spoken," she replied. "It is only the tone that changes." Something flickered across his face, quickly subdued. He gestured toward a chair, but she remained standing, unwilling to sit while the ground beneath her still felt uncertain. The fire cracked softly, impatient. He exhaled, a sound of effort rather than relief. "You are being misjudged," he said. "And you are allowing it." The accusation stung because it was almost tender. Eliza's composure wavered. "I am allowed very little," she said quietly, "including your silence." The words escaped before she could weigh them. For a moment, the Duke said nothing. Then he moved, not toward her, but away, pacing once before stopping near the shelves, his fingers brushing spines as if grounding himself in permanence. "My silence," he said carefully, was never indifference. She laughed once, without humor. Then it was cruelty, she answered. The word hung between them, undeniable. He turned at that, fully, his eyes darkened by something she had never before been permitted to see. It was fear, he said. The admission struck like a bell. Eliza's breath caught. Fear did not belong to men like him. It was a currency women spent daily. She searched his face for irony and found none. Of what? She asked, though she suspected the answer already. He closed the distance between them by a single step. Of claiming what I could not afford to lose, he said. And of losing it anyway. The air tightened. Eliza felt the past rearrange itself, moments reinterpreted, silences acquiring shape. You watched, she said, her voice low. You let them think the worst of me. He did not deny it. I watched because I believed restraint would protect us both, he replied. I was wrong. The fire flared, as if agreeing. Outside, rain intensified, blurring the world beyond the glass. Eliza's hands curled at her sides. Your protection, she said, has nearly ruined me. He bowed his head, not in apology but acknowledgment. Which is why I asked you here, he said. Because there is a point beyond which silence becomes surrender. The word struck her again, echoing his earlier admonition. She took a breath, steadying herself. Lord Percival has declared his intentions, she said. Publicly. The Duke's jaw tightened. I am aware. She lifted her chin. Then you must also be aware that refusal will cost me dearly. He met her gaze, unflinching. Yes. A pause. And acceptance will cost you more. The truth of it settled heavily. Eliza crossed the room at last, stopping just beyond his reach. You speak as though you have authority, she said. Yet you have claimed none. His voice dropped, intimate despite the distance. Authority is not always announced, he replied. Sometimes it is assumed. She shook her head, anger sharpening her resolve. I am tired of assumptions, she said. If you wish me to defy society, you must tell me why. He studied her, as if weighing the cost of honesty. Then, softly, he spoke the words that fractured the room. Wrong rival, my dear. She stared at him, the phrase unraveling everything it touched. You believe, she said slowly, that I chose him to provoke you. He did not look away. I know you chose him to survive, he answered. And I cannot bear that you believed I would not. The confession stripped him of armor. Eliza felt something break open within her, a mixture of relief and grief. You never told me, she whispered. He shook his head. I was waiting for certainty. She smiled sadly. Certainty is a luxury, she said. I had only consequence. A sound reached them then, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps in the corridor beyond the door, a murmur of voices. Discovery hovered dangerously close. The Duke stepped nearer, urgency tightening his features. You must decide, he said. Soon. Eliza looked at the door, then back at him, her heart racing with possibility and peril. She realized, with startling clarity, that this was no longer about scandal alone. It was about choosing between being protected in silence or claimed in daylight. As the voices drew nearer, she lifted her gaze to his and understood that whatever she chose next would alter them both forever. The assembly convened beneath a ceiling painted with gods who had never been asked to behave. Gaslight shimmered against gilt and crystal, lending every face a practiced glow, as if virtue itself were reflected light rather than substance. Eliza entered on Lord Percival's arm, as announced, her posture immaculate, her expression serene enough to satisfy those who demanded compliance. Each step felt measured against consequence. The room received her with interest sharpened by judgment. Tonight, the story would either settle or shatter, and everyone sensed it. Lord Percival performed his role with ease. He guided her through greetings, accepted admiration, laughed where laughter was expected. His hand at her elbow lingered a fraction too long, possessive, declarative. Eliza allowed it, because resistance would be read as performance. She kept her gaze forward, refusing to search the crowd for the Duke, refusing the comfort or cruelty of finding him absent. She told herself she was steady. Yet beneath the silk and composure, her pulse betrayed her, quickened by the knowledge that waiting had ended. Music gathered, a swelling overture that drew the room inward. Lord Percival leaned close, his voice warm with triumph. "You see," he murmured, "how easily they accept what is presented." Eliza inclined her head politely, saying nothing. Acceptance, she knew, was conditional, always provisional. As if summoned by the thought, a shift rippled through the crowd. Conversations faltered. Attention tilted, as unmistakable as weather turning. The Duke of Ravensmere had entered. He did not hurry. His presence altered the room not by force but gravity. Conversations made space for him without realizing they had done so. He crossed the floor alone, his expression composed, his eyes fixed not on Eliza but on the space beside her, as though measuring absence. Lord Percival noticed, too late. His smile tightened. "Ah," he said lightly, "the evening improves." The Duke stopped before them, bowed with immaculate restraint, and addressed Lord Percival first. "My lord," he said, his tone civil as steel. "A word." The request was not a question. Lord Percival hesitated, glancing at Eliza, calculating advantage. The Duke did not look at her yet. That omission spoke louder than possession ever could. "Later," Lord Percival replied, too cheerfully. "I am engaged." The Duke inclined his head. "So am I." A murmur passed through the onlookers, sharp as breath drawn. Eliza felt the moment stretch, the room holding itself still. Lord Percival's hand tightened reflexively on her arm. The Duke's gaze flicked there at last. "Release her," he said quietly. The words landed without drama, yet they split the air. Lord Percival laughed once, incredulous. "Surely." The Duke stepped closer, reducing the distance with deliberate calm. "Now," he said. Something in his voice ended the debate. Lord Percival withdrew his hand, color rising beneath his practiced ease. He searched the Duke's face for concession and found none. Around them, silence settled, hungry and attentive. Eliza stood between the two men, suddenly aware that the choice she had postponed had arrived in public, unmercifully illuminated. The Duke turned to her then, fully. His expression was not possessive, nor apologetic, but resolute. "Lady Eliza," he said, formal as any introduction, "I regret the necessity of this moment." A pause. "But not the truth of it." She met his gaze, her breath shallow. "Which is?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath. He spoke clearly, every word calibrated to be heard. "That my silence has been mistaken for absence, and that I will not permit that error to continue." A ripple of sound passed through the assembly, restrained but unmistakable. Lord Percival stiffened, his pride flaring. "You presume much," he said sharply. The Duke did not look away from Eliza. "I presume only what I am prepared to defend," he replied. Then to her, softly but unmistakably, "If you wish me to step back, I will. If you wish me to speak, I will do so now, without reserve." The offer carried weight beyond romance. It carried consequence. Eliza felt the room tilt toward her, expectant, demanding resolution. She thought of survival, of silence, of the cost of being endured rather than chosen. She thought of anonymous kindness and visible scandal, of protection that asked nothing and love that demanded everything. Slowly, she turned from Lord Percival. The movement was small, yet it altered the air. "My lord," she said to him, her tone gracious and final, "I thank you for your attentions. They are no longer required." The dismissal was polite, devastating. A few gasps escaped before they could be stifled. Lord Percival's face hardened, then smoothed into something brittle. He bowed stiffly and withdrew, applause denied him at last. The Duke did not reach for her. Instead, he waited, allowing her the dignity of decision completed. Eliza faced him, her heart loud in her ears. "You asked me to wait," she said. "I have." He nodded once. "And I am here." She drew a breath. "Then speak," she said. The Duke turned slightly, addressing the room without flourish. "I claim responsibility," he said, "for the protection and regard of Lady Eliza Harrington. Any speculation to the contrary may consider itself corrected. It was not a declaration of love. It was something rarer, accountability." The assembly absorbed it slowly, resistance softening into reluctant acceptance. The Duke looked back at her, the severity in his expression gentled by something like hope. "If you will have it," he added quietly now, "I offer what should have been offered sooner." Eliza felt tears threaten, uninvited. She did not reach for his hand. She simply inclined her head, a gesture of trust more binding than touch. The music resumed, uncertain but persistent. As the room breathed again, she knew the true reckoning had only begun. Dawn arrived without ceremony, pale and resolute, as though the night's excesses had been quietly forgiven but not forgotten. Eliza stood at her window and watched London resume its habits, carriages rolling, voices rising, the world insisting upon continuity. Yet something within her had shifted beyond reversal. The Duke's words from the night before did not echo loudly. They settled, firm as a foundation laid at last. Accountability, he had called it. The notion steadied her more than romance ever could. Society responded slowly, as it always did when forced to reconsider its judgments. There were no public apologies, no swift reversals, only adjustments. Invitations returned, cautiously worded. Conversations softened, then normalized, as if scandal were a weather event best ignored once past. Eliza moved through these changes with deliberate grace, accepting neither triumph nor penitence. She understood now that dignity was not granted by consensus but sustained by choice. The Duke did not hover, did not rescue. He allowed her space to stand unassisted, which proved the greatest protection of all. They met again in daylight, in the gardens at Ravensmere House, where winter had begun to loosen its hold. Bare branches caught the light like silver script against the sky. The Duke waited near the path, hat removed, posture unguarded in a way that would have shocked the ballroom. "I will not pretend last night resolved everything," he said once she approached. His candor was unadorned. Eliza appreciated that he no longer hid behind restraint. "Nor should it," she replied. "Resolution is not the same as certainty." He inclined his head, accepting the boundary. Respect, she found, could feel like intimacy. Lord Percival attempted no further advances, though his resentment found quieter channels. A remark here, a hesitation there, each designed to remind her that men seldom relinquished advantage gracefully. Yet his influence waned, eclipsed by his refusal to risk himself openly. The contrast was instructive. Eliza observed it without satisfaction, only clarity. Power, she realized, revealed itself most honestly at the moment it was challenged. The Duke had stood. Lord Percival had not. The Duke's offer unfolded gradually, stripped of spectacle. He spoke not of love first, but of partnership, of visibility, of a future negotiated rather than imposed. He acknowledged his failures without excuse, his fear without indulgence. "I believed control was protection," he told her one afternoon, voice low, earnest. "I understand now that protection without choice is merely another cage." Eliza listened, weighing each word against experience. When she spoke, it was not to absolve him, but to meet him. "Then let us choose," she said, daily and aloud. Their understanding did not silence the world, it altered how the world sounded. Whispers lost their edge. Judgment softened into curiosity. Eliza found herself no longer bracing for rooms, but entering them with composure born of alignment. The Duke walked beside her, not ahead. When he offered his arm, it was with a question in his eyes, answered only when she chose to take it. The gesture, simple as it was, rewrote her history. For the first time, she was not being escorted into narrative, but co-authoring one. Time confirmed what passion alone could not. The Duke's consistency replaced his silence. Eliza's confidence deepened into authority. Together, they became unremarkable in the way that true unions often are, defined not by drama but by endurance. Yet memory lingered, and with it, meaning. On the anniversary of the assembly, they returned there, not to commemorate scandal, but to observe transformation. The chandeliers burned no brighter than usual. The room held no breath. The world had moved on. As they stood near the edge of the floor, Eliza felt the echo of her former self, poised between survival and surrender. She turned to the Duke, studying the man who had once watched in silence. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. He understood at once. "The waiting," he replied. She nodded. He considered, then answered with the honesty she had come to expect. "I regret the cost," he said, "but not the truth it forced me to speak." She smiled, accepting that love, like dignity, often arrived sharpened by loss. When the music began, it was unremarkable, a familiar waltz without ceremony. The Duke extended his hand, palm open. Eliza took it. They moved together without spectacle, two figures among many, no longer objects of scrutiny but participants in continuity. Yet those who noticed sensed something rare, a harmony forged not by conquest, but by consent. The dance ended without applause. They remained, hands still joined, unashamed. Later, as evening gathered and the world resumed its murmurs, Eliza understood the legacy of what had passed. It was not a tale of triumph over society, nor of love conquering all. It was a quieter victory, the reclamation of voice. The Duke had learned to speak. She had learned not to wait. Between them stood a truth neither would relinquish again. And as they stepped forward into the ordinary promise of tomorrow, Eliza knew that silence, once their greatest adversary, would never again define the space between them. The city did not mark the moment, yet something subtle endured, passed in glances and habits, in how women paused before yielding and how men learned to listen. Eliza carried that knowledge lightly, refusing to weaponize it, allowing it instead to steady her steps. The Duke watched her sometimes with a look that held wonder rather than possession, as if love were a discipline he practiced daily. When challenges arose, as they always did, they met them without retreat, recalling the night when courage chose daylight. Their story, spoken rarely and never embellished, became a quiet reference point, proof that restraint could learn bravery and that dignity, once claimed, asked to be defended. In that understanding lay their truest inheritance, a living testament shaped not by gossip's flame but by the slow, unyielding light of choice. It endured, patient and bright, beyond seasons, beyond rumor, beyond fear, beyond any single night.